What up, YouTube? All right, welcome back to Magic the Blabbering episode 7. Today we're going to follow up a little bit on Spiderman because last week we talked pretty in depth about it. Essentially, we're going to be talking about what happened and how this set feels in general. And we're going to talk a little bit about, the overall vibe after playing with the cards for about a week and what it's kind of led to in terms of the draft, as well as kind of following up on some of the talking points I had, which were referring to parasitic mechanics and how the set feels in general. So let's jump into it. All right, so last week we talked about parasitic mechanics and what that means, comparing it to the initiative and dungeons and stuff like that. So just to follow up on that, just a little rehash, parasitic mechanics usually lead to one of two things. Either they're, again, ubiquitously played, and when they're in the game, they completely warp everything around it. Or the latter, which is they're only playable in a block confined environment, and they kind of drift off into obscurity, never to be played again, which is why I gave dungeons and initiative as the example, because literally the same mechanic, and it actually just drives the point home that much clearer, because one is very broken, one is very banned, one is very game warping, the other one probably never broke anything in its life other than, again, like Acerak combo, things like that. Because if you're not aware of Acerak, it is a card from AFR, Adventures of Forgotten Realms, that when it enters the battlefield, you enter into the dungeon, and then it returns back to your hand if you haven't completed a dungeon. And I believe it's a May ability, so you can just do this in perpetuity if you have an Omniscience in play. And yeah, obviously, Tomb of Annihilation allows you to drain life, and yeah, you win. So that wasn't playable in standard, though. It was just funny to do. And pretty much every mechanic like that, when it's in standard, kind of doesn't shake up the game too hard. You can argue that other mechanics, say like Dredge or Storm, those are also somewhat parasitic because they are, when they are in the game, they warp the game around it, similar to initiative. And so they have to be very careful about reprinting stuff like that. Like Storm literally is the scale at which things are broken. So Dredge also sits on that scale, like very high on the scale, where when Dredge is playable, it is the only thing that's played. And it is not good for modern. It's barely good for legacy, and definitely in vintage. Vintage has a host of other problems, but vintage had stuff like Bizarre Baghdad, which, that is like a $8,000 card. So, and just makes their game literally explode on turn 1. So yeah, weird things with those scaling properties of mechanics. So let's talk about Spiderman. We talked last week about parasitic mechanics again, and how the Spiders Matter stuff was definitely the lower tier, just set mechanic. So you can't fault Spiders Matters in a Spider-Man set for existing, because of the fact that it just cares about spiders. I did critique the fact that it cares about specifically spider heroes. So yeah, take with that what you will. Obviously Cosmic Spider-Man can be a commander. It's been popping off a little bit in standard right now. People have been trying out Cosmic Spider-Man and been doing with some success. There's a lot of different mana dorks that can create any color that you want. There's a lot of possibilities to use lands that cast spiders like that, like Cavern of Souls and other kind of like kindred lands. On top of just kind of generally okay lands, Multiversal Passage also helps it. That has been one of the best cards by far. Multiversal Passage, I've kind of put it into every deck Dare I say it's filling in the gaps a little bit more than starting town. But yeah, so obviously the Spider Hero Matters has been mildly okay. I would put it in the realm of like tier 2.5, closer to tier 3. Definitely can win some games. And on Arena, you can actually hit Mythic with a tier 3 deck. Depends on the way the wind blows that day and who's on ladder, how Matchmaker wants to bless you for that day. So, you know, if you want to play Spider's Matter deck, you can definitely hit it. Anyways, moving on into the other mechanics. So we had web slinging, and web is the Through the Omen Paths version. And then we have Mayhem, which is also the naming for Through the Omen Paths. Just want to make sure that that was the case. Just double checking. I have played with the cards a bunch, but just wanted to make sure that my brain wasn't completely fried today. So anyways, the whole issue here is, or the big talking point, the thing I wanted to kind of talk about, have these mechanics turned out to be more parasitic than I previously thought? And the answer is kind of yeah. So let's first talk about Mayhem. So Mayhem, we have Fleem, we have Desecrex, Carnage, those types of cards that, you know, care about Mayhem. Obviously, Gobin and Fleem don't care about Mayhem as much. The Green Goblin and Norman Osborn, they don't care about Mayhem as much as they want to create Mayhem. So I would say the biggest kind of card that's able to be played, and people will play him if able to, because of, you know, the hype around Fleem and just how fun the card is in general. Like if you flip Fleem, like you kind of win the game if you have a deck that's built around it. And that kind of leads into the next point about it, which is the deck has to be doing the thing. It is kind of turned out that when you have Fleem in play, that it's almost unflippable. Like if you put Gobin in play and you don't have anything to do with the Mayhem, then you just kind of want Norman Osborn or Gobin the whole time. And you know, let's not talk about how annoying it is to refer to two cards when talking about one card. Let's not talk about that. But yeah, so Mayhem, although it does care about looting, rummaging, you know, whatever type of mechanic that is, discarding a card to draw a card, it is definitely turned out to be a little bit more parasitic than previously thought. Obviously, there's a lot of ways to just do this incidentally. I built a pretty neat Mayhem Profs deck that was a little bit more built around just Mayhem, or I'm sorry, not Mayhem, but the discard draw aspect with Profs and Monument. And that was way more fun. A lot of other content creators have also done that. So that is definitely the more like straightforward, this deck will incidentally do the thing. So while Mayhem is able to be done with this process here with, like, say, Boros Monument, Grixis Monument, Dimir Monument, like, pick what flavor you want to do. Overall, Mayhem as a mechanic, do I want to build a Rakdos Mayhem deck, has been almost a resounding no. Mainly because, well, Rakdos mana sucks. So we don't really want to build a Rakdos mana base. It is just not the vibe right now until, you know, we get more options from Lorwyn. Yeah, so they just really want you to have the entire deck drawing and discarding every single turn. If you're not triggering Mayhem initially, then you're not functioning. And it becomes very apparent when it happens. When Fleem's on the battlefield, yeah, you can like kind of sneak in a Kefka for like 3 mana. You can play Quantum Riddler again for 3 mana as well. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with Gobin, but he needs his enablers. It's a little bit more parasitic than I would say web slinging has been, but we'll talk about web slinging in a second. So overall with Mayhem, I felt like it was decent when you're able to go off with it, but it feels very temperamental. And why I bring up my Grixis monument, or just monument with profs in general, as kind of like a good signpost of why this deck is kind of funky, is mainly because the rest of the deck is just functioning. It's just doing its thing without ever needing fleem to flip. And you're kind of just saying like, yeah, I guess this works. You know, I have like the skittering kitten, or yeah, masked meower, whatever you want to call it. Like those are, you know, very, very specific cards that are able to enable Mayhem and stuff like that. And you're just not relying on them. So for the most part, like if you're going to build a Mayhem deck, you probably need profs in there. And at the end of the day, FOMO and Mako will probably just take over the deck. And that's another thing. When you're building the Mayhem deck, you probably should have those 8 cards in there. So you're missing out on some of like the different payoffs for this. And I would also say, like, even from a commander perspective, definitely Green Goblin is more of the obvious, like, all right, I can build a whole deck around Grixis that's looting, and then play Green Goblin for 4 mana. No Norman Osborn, because you would need him to, I mean, obviously you could play him on 2, sure, but you would definitely need something to enable this fleem and then have stuff to play with it. So we definitely want to make sure that, you know, these mechanics are flexible. And Mayhem, while it is built around things that you would do in these colors, it's not very flexible if you are to build an entire deck built on Mayhem. And this is coming from my experience trying to build a bunch of, like, even just profs monument with more Mayhem cards. It became very apparent that these cards either could be more utility removal cards, or they could just be the normal set of cards that you might want to just play from the normal builds with Mayhem, or sorry, with Monument and stuff like that. So overall, it just has felt like very patchworked. And so for the most part, again, I found myself cutting a lot of the cards, and it just doesn't lead to you wanting to build a whole entire deck around this mechanic. And that's not the most terrible thing about Spider-Man, obviously. The fact of the matter is, in Constructed, these types of mechanics are flooded into the set in order to give you more stuff to do in Limited and stuff like that. So when you're dealing with this stuff, it's not terrible. So it's really just like, does this interfere with me having to play this card in like a one-off version? And that's really what you care about. Like, we can go and say this mechanic is completely terrible when, say, like, you need other things to enter the dungeon around it. Like, there were a bunch of enter the dungeon cards that were just like, yeah, when you complete a dungeon, but this only enters the dungeon once. Unlike Acerak, where it put himself back into your hand and he would not come into play until you finished a dungeon. So the card literally demanded you to finish a dungeon and would finish a dungeon itself. So there's no mechanics like that where you're just kind of like, well, how do I complete this thing they're asking me to do, which is like a little mini game that is kind of like pulling you away from actually like winning the game. Those things are better for Commander, because in Commander, you can have conversations with people and say like, I'm going to do this. Can you not, interfere with that for a bit? It's like, it's not even that bad. It's not even that good. I just want to do my silly little thing. But yeah, so Mayhem, a little bit more parasitic than I personally thought, than a lot of other people thought. And at the end of the day, I think Gobin and Fleem will still make it through, since Gobin as a creature is pretty good, unblockable 1/1 that connives. So that's really good. I think, even from the basic lore and spoilers, we're going to get more stuff like that. And I think it might even be better than it. But yeah, overall, Mayhem trying to commit mayhem and do things to that, I would say probably lower on the tier scale and a little bit more parasitic than we thought. So now let's talk about web slinging, or the end web mechanic. So while it doesn't need as much setup, it is similar to the whole aspect of, you know, does my guy live? Do I have the ability to do this? Like Llanowars Wars on 1 do not live most of the time. So saying like, okay, Boris, while he can become a 5/4 on turn 2, if we just play Llanowar War and then play the Llanowar War after, which is a great play, it definitely is not going to be as consistent as you might think. So what in web is really trying to do is like play like a paw patch, you know, and then put your paw patch back in your hand, or some other card that's like, you know, the frenzied bailiff or something like that, where we can actually like comfortably play the unweb. And the best unweb payoffs like that are probably the 3 mana 3/3 in white that's, you know, asking you to like play for 1. So the unweb for 1 and 2 have been kind of decent, but the Selesnya like full build arounds within web, which is like the silk card, has kind of shown itself to be more of a like limited bomb than a constructed bomb. And here's the reason why, in my opinion, this would be the case. It is tempo negative play. And when you're played on 3, you're returning a card to your hand and you're not able to play it back out. If for some reason your Llanowar War lives on turn 2 and then you just play a silk out, you're now subjecting your silk to a lot of the removal that has to be played in the format. So against the black deck, that's kind of a no-go. So you kind of always have to play on turn 3 and then pretty much hope that your mana dork lives so you can actually get some value from it. And this just doesn't fit in that deck super well. So overall, when you're thinking about, okay, well, which deck can this fit into? And obviously it's like stuff like Cage and just other things like that. And for the most part, like the only card that I really see popping off with in web is Boris and the other mono white taxing spider. So yeah, for the most part, it is like, I don't know, this might be not your experience with this, with silk. You know, you could have a silk card that, or a silk deck that's popping off. And it remains to be seen as well. These cards can, you know, definitely take a little bit more shape as we get more sets as well. Because again, with every set, your big set mechanic is not going to just like be the only thing that's played, and that's not really good if that's happening as well. But we're still not seeing like stuff like Duskmourn kind of pop through everything, where like Eerie is like a whole deck, like blue-white enchantments and auras and stuff. It's just like the whole deck is pretty much Duskmourn cards, because that's what the set was kind of built around. But these mechanics for there, again, are just so open in general that we get the opportunity to play other like enchantments and auras. And then the foundational like creatures that care about that stuff, all from Duskmourn, can finally like have a bunch more stuff to play with. Like a 1 mana like scavenger card, and the 2 mana like discounters, or like things that make glimmers. Like there's a bunch of ways to go wide with these decks. Like they don't have just kind of a mono-focused game plan where you're just like, I need to be drawing and discarding every single turn. I need my Shadow of the Goblin card in play in order to like really pop off with mayhem every single turn. Or I need Ultimate Green Goblin to stick. You know, it's like those types of things. You need your like core piece to stick, and if it doesn't stick, the game plan just kind of falls through. This is why, you know, like Gear Hulk decks in general don't need this type of stuff, because Gear Hulk is like the Bright Glass Gear Hulk. To, you know, give an example of like, why would I play Silk when I can just play a Gear Hulk deck? And the answer is probably not. You probably don't need to do this. And it's because that deck has a toolbox that it's sifting through with Gear Hulk, and it can just do the thing without having to have some type of gimmick. And you can go wide, you can play cage, and there's some other like Spider-Man cards that kind of fit into the deck as well, like the Through the Omen Path's actual card, which can convoke and then pretty much do the cage thing every single turn. And we've seen some Bant decks pop up that are kind of doing that stuff. Then we also have seen Druneth, which is the 2-mana Jackal card, also pop up in both. Well, people have been trying it in the cage deck as well. Personally, I think that it's a little bit extra to try out more blue cards in the green-white cage deck. While you can't play a bunch of Bant lands and stuff, it doesn't really play super well. And, you know, you might end up with like a very skewed hand, especially if you're trying to play Gear Hulk. So Gear Hulk definitely needs you to have that perfect mana for it. And the Grixis mana for, I would say, like the Oil Deep Gear Hulk definitely can also be played. So, you know, it's not terrible, but yeah, Druneth probably is the best card to go in that deck because it can create the variance in the both creating a bunch of extra people, because that's what it does. And we'll talk about that deck because that's one of the decks of the week here. But overall, it has been a little bit wanting with that. So again, kind of rehashing like where these mechanics kind of ended up here is they definitely haven't performed as well in their small vacuum of just like, do I want to make a deck that only cares about in web? Do I want to make a deck that only cares about mayhem? We have been left with kind of tier 2.5, tier 3 versions of these decks. And again, it has gone back into the scenario where we pretty much, you know, just want to add one or two of those cards and then just build a deck with all the cards we have available in standard. So, you know, while that's not a bad thing, it definitely doesn't provide a lot of like meat to this set, specifically because there's not that many cards in the set that really hold up on their own. So we're kind of left with a handful of stuff, and a lot of the stuff cares about these things. And because of this, it kind of hurts the set a bit. But yeah, if you're looking for signposts on things to do with this set, look at the things that are not trying to be like limited full archetypes, because then you're going to find stuff like Craven, or I would say Naya as well, where the other like full Spider-Man, you know, built mechanics, you don't have to worry about those because they're just like the Craven, like Golgari card just cares about you killing stuff. So it's very reminiscent of the card Shovel. That was like the bounty hunter card, where it's like when you killed something, you would draw a card. And so you just build a whole Golgari deck built around like, you know, hating creatures out and stuff. So that was a pretty good mechanic. And the, I think his name is Bracco. It's been pretty good as well. I do like that deck. So, you know, things like that, that's what you want to worry about. But overall, the two very like signposty type of mechanics, Mayhem and web slinging, overall have kind of looked like baits. And this kind of goes to the actual like deck that wanted to play them too, which was Pixie and Green White and Gruul as well. I think the Gruul deck might be able to use it a little bit better than other things, but yeah, Pixie has a deck, and you know, if it's not doing the things that like Edge of Eternities gave it, which again, it's like when you look at the most playable cards in standard, granted putting Vivi out of that equation because, you know, that's just a mistake that they made in Final Fantasy. Most of the playable cards in standard right now are from standard sets that are in universe. So a lot of people thought this might happen where they just kind of like power down some of the stuff for flavor and just kind of like put form over function for the most part. I don't think this was a good choice. Personally, if I was designing the cards, I would try to make some more stuff like constructed playable. But again, a lot of these sets have been morphed multiple different ways. So Spider-Man was botched because they tried to take a small Aftermath style, Assassin's Creed style commander set and turn it into a full set. And so we got this kind of Frankenstein of a set. And it's weird. Obviously, Spider-Man is the biggest, I believe, selling and supported Marvel character, I think, that they have in general. It's definitely one of the oldest Marvel characters and heroes. So it wasn't like a terrible first take on Marvel in MTG. I think if they had a different starting foot with how they started the set, it definitely would have been a little bit different. Overall, though, I think from my perspective, I think that Spider-Man probably wasn't the best starting point, even if it is the biggest selling Marvel superhero of all. I personally believe that, you know, for the many reasons that I mapped out in the last podcast about how the set's doing, how people are losing money, all these different things, I personally think that they should have started with something like the Marvel superheroes thing that they just leaked, which is obviously going to be Avengers. And they should have just started with Avengers and then given Spider-Man more time to cook because, you know, not because it's easy, but because you're able to see what people really are like jumping onto. Obviously, the stuff needs to be planned a year to 2 years in advance. We're not forgetting that part because there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline. They're not going to just like look at Spider-Man right now. Okay, it's time to design the Avengers set. Like, that's not how it works. Obviously, everything was planned out well in advance. And I think hindsight on this one, they could have given it a little bit more time to cook and not even thinking about how it was received. Just knowing like the pipeline of how the set was looking and how it was designed, I'm pretty sure this could have gotten a little bit more time to incubate. So you could have really done their best hero a little bit better, you know, especially if it's like the most well-known thing. Everybody does know about Avengers unless you've been living under a rock in terms of like social media and just the general media in general, which in that case, you probably don't play MTG as well. So not sure where that disconnect is coming from, where we can look at Avengers and be like, well, Spider-Man's bigger. It's like, but what about the last 10 years of Marvel creating movies around Avengers and that just selling so well that they pretty much drained the entire swamp of Avengers stuff. And now people are just like, yeah, I think I just don't ever want to see a Marvel movie again. Not even just Avengers. They're just kind of tired on all of it. Like X-Men, like they have drained everything. In terms of like, you know, does a single hero universe work for Marvel? Not Marvel, for MTG, because it obviously works for Marvel and works in the sense of making a movie around one character. That's even better. It's like we want one dude to make an entire movie around so it can just be monofocus and you can see that one person's story, actually set up a narrative around it. With MTG, you want more narratives, you want intersecting stories, you want a narrative, like an actual narrative. And this is one of the reasons why Through the Omen Pass looks crazy and Spider-Man is kind of equally crazy because, you know, we're just getting all this stuff thrown at us all at once. The mechanics kind of also need to be that. They need to somehow tie together as well. And so now we have this kind of less effective mechanic, you know, because Mayhem obviously is a powered down madness. So, you know, things like that. Even Madness, when Madness came out, while it was kind of broken because of the fact that you could do stuff at instant speed, it did not care about the speed. It still demanded your entire deck, if it was going to be a Madness deck, do Madness things. And Madness was a very aggro type of archetype. So if you try to build Madness in like Historic, which actually used to be kind of a thing before MH3 just destroyed the format, then yeah, you would have to have all these cards that were just kind of like caring about Madness in different ways. And yeah, so that's kind of how I feel about it. And I think a lot of other people feel as well. For the most part, when brewing this set, it was very, very hard to climb. And I felt when I was brewing stuff around more of the mechanic and just less of like a peppered version of the mechanic, I found myself not able to win a single game. So it felt bad. And yeah, so I personally am not super stoked on how these mechanics kind of played out here. And I found them to be a little bit more parasitic than I previously thought. And, you know, they're not dungeons. We're not seeing this mechanic be completely unplayable, but it is definitely like waiting for something else to kind of carry one of these other cards. And that remains to be seen. Again, Goblin and Fleem still kind of fit in monument decks as well. So, you know, we can see like a Jeskai Oculus monument decks kind of pop up again. Maybe even just Profs and Oculus and Jeskai. And also we can probably try more Impulse builds as well with both like Spiderman 2099. Obviously, if anybody's been paying attention, we saw a lot of plot decks pop up. I kind of painted one of those decks last week with Croaky's build on early access, and that was like pretty much a lot of people have kind of jumped on that style where they're just like, okay, use Jace from Outlaws of Thunder Junction and plot in order to put these modal cards into play. Yeah, for the most part, after playing that deck a bit, you know, it didn't feel super great. These things don't really play super well on their own. They, again, need the rest of the deck there, and they need your deck to care about this stuff. So, all right. So that was my first synopsis about this set, and let's talk about the thing I haven't talked about yet, which is Spider-Man Draft. And I was kind of waiting to play to the draft before evaluating it, and you know, obviously I'm not a draft streamer or content creator, so it's not really my place to talk about this stuff. Although I have hit Mythic and draft before, and I do draft when I really like a set. Personally, what took me out of drafting was probably around Bloomburrow, where the draft just became super mono-focused, like on green stuff. And it just kind of took me out of it, and I stopped trying to like climb and invest like money and time into the format. So I've just been kind of like playing draft whenever I want to. Last couple drafts have not been super great. Edge of Eternity's draft was not super great. Final Fantasy was very fun. Awesome draft set. Whenever it comes back, jump on that stuff because that was a really fun set. I think I climbed up to Diamond during Final Fantasy, and again, just like I kind of lost some like drive for it. But yeah, like I think draft is great, and I have a lot of experience in it. So a lot of my friends also kind of play draft, and you know, this is a big thing for people, for anybody who wants to play the game. But you know, it's similar to like League of Legends, where you're playing like normal Summoner's Rift. If anybody is aware of like League of Legends or plays it, it's like playing Constructed can feel equally as like stressful sometimes. And so if you just want to hang out and chill, maybe a little bit of TFT might be more of your style, where you can kind of play with some of the things from the game and, you know, play a different version of that game. So TFT definitely, you know, is a drafting style game. It's an auto battler, but you know, it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but that's a little bit closer to like what I would compare draft to. It's a very chill version of the game, so it's fun. You can do whatever you want with it for the most part. But yeah, let's talk about Spider-Man Draft. So again, with the design kind of botch flop of Spider-Man, of it being like this small commander set that they had at like pretty much just super glue a bunch of cards in. And that's, you know, me being a little bit critical, but you know, just being honest about it. It's definitely been disappointing to see a new format they created, because I don't know if everyone's aware, but they created a new way to draft with Spider-Man called Pick 2 Draft, where you're at a table of 4 players and you get to pick 2 cards per pick. So normally you pick 1 card, you pass the pack around 8 player tables, But now they, for a smaller set like this, they created a new draft style called pick 2 draft. And so now you have 4 players at a table and you pick 2 cards from. So for the most part, this has been pretty fun, where you actually get to kind of decide, you know, a couple different directions at the start. And so like if you're like new to this style and you're a little bit newer to draft in general, if you're going to draft at a high level, you have to be willing to like be flexible from the start. Like your pack 1 can't just be, oh, I found this bomb, let me just hard force this color from pack 1. It can't be that. And it can never be that in draft in general. But if you're a little bit less experienced, and this might take years of experience in order to get through, because when you're playing for fun, that is a thing that you want to do initially. So you'll just kind of follow that initial impulse to be like, oh, I found this grixis card, pack 1, so I guess I'm going grixis. And that's not really how you want to do it. But if you're just having fun, you're not playing like the competitive ranked style of drafting, or just a competitive draft at real tables or whatever, maybe that's what you do. And it's completely valid. It's completely fine. Possibly you can high roll and it all works out and it's, you know, not completely screwed. But for the most part, your early picks want to just be signposts to where you can go. And the more you see what other people are taking at the table, then you can make your decision maybe around the end of pack 1 to beginning of pack 2. That's when you start, you know, making your final decisions on like, okay, I'm doing this now. So that's completely valid, completely okay if you want a hard force from pack 1. But yeah. So anyways, how does that affect what's happening on Arena? So Arena pick 2 drafts have 2 different flavors. And specifically with the traditional, because they gave out draft tokens for this set, but they didn't allow you to use the draft tokens on the Premier Best of 1, which is the ranked version of the set here. So you're kind of forced, if you want to play with draft tokens, to go into the traditional draft. But what's a big problem there is that when you go into the traditional draft, because I, you know, just initially was like, okay, I have a token, I'm going to use it. There were 8 people at the table and we were all picking 2. So regardless of like how many more cards were in those packs, etc., or how many packs there were, I tried this twice before I just like kind of gave up on this style of drafting here, but it felt terrible. And I don't know why they decided to make the traditional draft like a thing like this. I wholeheartedly believe that they should have just left it pick 1. Mainly because like I get what they're doing, because traditional draft, if you're left with 4 people at the table, can definitely feel like more of an easy way to kind of get the perfect deck and get the perfect sideboard. So we definitely want to make sure that that doesn't happen, but to have it be so you have 8 people at your table felt like a terrible compromise. And I'm not just saying this from just like knocking it, I'm saying this from a player's standpoint. Every single pair was not just contested, but hard contested. And the things that really stuck out as the lowest power level things like Rakdos and other things like that, and we'll talk about some of the level of the cards here, those felt terrible to play and terrible to draft. And they definitely felt like they were lower on the totem pole of everybody's radar as well. So if you started Gruul, you were definitely getting contested on your green. If you tried green-white, you were definitely contested on your green. And so you can kind of see a little bit of a pattern there where it's like if you're trying to go blue-white, you're definitely contested on your blue. If you're trying to go Dimir, you're definitely contested on your blue. And that leaves the odd man out here, which is like white, black, and red, which those colors could be a little bit okay on their own. You can try Mardu, like removal deck or whatever like that. But for the most part, there were only 5 archetypes that they decided to support here. So we could talk about that right now. So blue-white was modified and that was like auras, equipments, counters, stuff like that. That was kind of a fun deck to play. Dimir was connive, so we have villains matter, and then also connive with your graveyard. You had things like Docked Oct and Ozor that cared about a threshold in your graveyard, so you can get 8/8 with hexproof. Black Red Mayhem, by far probably the weakest of all the color pairs here. Again, Mayhem needs Mayhem to actually do stuff. You need to have your discard outlets and the cards to go along with it. So if your whole hand isn't just that, then you're kind of just playing all your Mayhem cards out for their full cost, and that feels terrible. So it's a very high variance with the draft too. You can have whole tables that pretty much never get your like big payoffs for Mayhem. So if you're playing black red and you see like some things that could play it for it, it's probably always correct to never try for this. And if you're actually doing it, you're either going for content or you're just happy to play it, happy to force it. But you also need the perfect cards for it, which again are like the rares like Carnage, and a bunch of the like actual playable red cards, which are like the Dinosaur Kofun, or like Kazuo, which is like a 6 mana 4/4 with first strike. I think it might actually be a 5/5. But yeah, those cards are a little bit harder to hit. And yeah, so it makes the black red Mayhem deck a little bit weird. So what you end up doing is you kind of force together a Grixis deck between the two of like, you have Dimir, but your blue's contested. So you end up having to go red as well. And then that will lead you into Grixis. But yeah, moving on from there, you have your red-black, sorry, not red-black, a red-green Gruul large spells, which this one felt pretty okay because you have a lot of like big green spells that are somewhat decent. I would also put it on a pretty low tier though, because while it does say red-green large spells, you're kind of wondering after looking at your packs, what large spells? There are like a few. So you end up looking at like the Spiderman and web cards, which is like Boris, Zan, and like Spiders Man, which like if you web it for like 6 mana, you can get like the Spider-Man and like a bunch of spiders. So then you can also play like things like Peter Porker and then boost everything up. And then you also have the kind of like the Dinosaur 6/6 with trample and ward and reach. And you can also play the big Gruul card that's like a 7 mana 6/7 with vigilance and draw a card when you play something 4 mana or greater. And that's pretty much what the deck cares about, is like a lot of the when you play something with 4 mana or greater, do a thing. This deck isn't terrible. I found myself playing it quite a bit. I probably have like 15 to 20 drafts on this set. So like, I'll talk about why I'm kind of done already, but like the set does have some fun stuff to do, but overall this last archetype was green, white, and web. This felt the best because it had the most support, because it was trying to be like the commander mechanic as well, and the constructed mechanics. So you ended up having a ton of stuff that fit in the web deck. And so green being one of the things that ties these decks together ended up making it really hard to draft green white. So you end up having like Bant as being where you want to end up, or Naya. And that's because red by far is the least like powerful of all the mechanics here. So you end up just kind of like seeing a bunch of red cards and having to take them. But yeah, so that's the mechanics here. So overall, it was the kind of green based pairings that kind of stand above the rest, or the blue based. So everything that's black based, you know, if you're finding yourself playing more like Dimir stuff, that can be okay. Dimir hasn't felt super bad, but you know, I found that I want to go to Esper or Bant most of the time if I'm getting contested on like the two best things to do, which is modified and in web. And you can even smash those two decks together. But yeah, if I was to recommend anything for this draft, don't play the traditional. It feels really bad. I feel like it's a complete waste of resources as well. So I would just play the 4-person draft, which it hasn't felt super bad. It does feel, because these archetypes are so like, hard contested, that you're even in the 4-person draft, you're going to have people just like forcing it from round 1, and it makes it very hard to draft green. And then you just kind of find yourself with the scraps, which can be Dimir or Rakdos, or even blue-white sometimes. Sometimes just like people just don't pick white cards for some reason. And that was probably because green overall feels like the best tying glue of all these different colors. So on like 17 lands, like Golgari was showing up with some of the most like actual wins, like trophies in the set. So because it has decent removal in both the colors, it has good creatures in both. So Golgari, even though it's not a dictated archetype here, can actually perform for you, which then makes it so you can play like Jund with Eddie Brock or Vigo, Venom, and like that kind of leads itself to like, how replayable is this? Because you have all these archetypes which kind of like eat off of each other a bit. They're kind of parasitic on themselves, similar to the way Mayhem is just by itself. Connive really, really wants to get counters, and they have to do that to win the game. Again, there's not that much top end. So when you do have top end, you want to make sure that you can grow your 4/5 or your, like, I think it's like a 4/6 flyer. Like those are the cards that you need to like have live in order to win the game, or else you're having like a 1/3 and you need to put all the counters in the world on it. So overall, it's like there's not that much power in the set, so you really have to like worry about like, can your engine put a small amount of like power on this so it can either not be chumped, not just be traded with, and also can get in for lethal damage at some point. So like it's felt very hard outside of like red green to actually have a creature that you play that is just like big enough to like win the game. And I guess that just kind of goes back to Spider-Man being like, not the strongest hero in the world. So you're never going to have like this giant creature that's also Spider-Man. You have a bunch of engines that are Spider-Man. So like the engine part kind of leads itself to green-white because you have stuff like Silk and the other and web cards, which all kind of play together with each other. So like you're definitely going to want, like if you hit Silk on pack 1, pick 1, you're probably just going to force that, even if it's incorrect not to, because the card's so good that like if that's your only green-white spell, you could just do the entire rest of the draft as like Bant, and you'll probably be able to get away with that. So overall, the how do I feel about this draft in general? It's felt pretty bad. It doesn't feel like fully fleshed out. You're missing a lot of like, well, there's only 5 archetypes, so I don't think it could have been better than this. I think that this is probably the best they could do given like time constraints and X other things. But yeah, the 4-person pick 2 definitely is a good idea, and I think that it's really fun for smaller pools and stuff like that. It can be fun for people just doing stuff at LGSs, fun to do at home with their friends. But overall, like the set behind this mechanic and this new drafting type has not felt great. So I think that it's not the greatest first impression of 4-pick draft, or I'm sorry, 2-pick draft with 4 people, and that it definitely could have been a little bit better. But overall, like, how do I feel? I don't feel mad or, anything like that. I just feel like it got boring really, really quick because you're doing a bunch of the same stuff over and over and over and over. So you end up kind of drafting the same kind of deck over and over. Even when you go and splash 3 colors, it feels the same. It feels the same even when you go Esper. It feels the same even when you go Bant. It feels the same even when you try to go like Naya or Jund. So overall, I feel like the biggest problem with the draft is that it's boring. It's not that it completely doesn't work, because it works. You know, it has its kind of like archetypes that are able to be mishmashed together. So you can kind of have like different drafts, but after about 10 drafts, I think 5 to 10 drafts is kind of like the threshold point for a lot of people of like, okay, am I going to like really invest time into this draft? And, you know, obviously Wizards is not going to balance for people who grind and stuff like that, because it's just like way more drafts than they would expect anybody to do on a single set. But this is the world now. This is what happens when you have digital stuff, and they should care about that a bit. And I know for a fact that when other live service games, specifically like TFT, people, they want people to play like at least 30 games or more per set. So if the set is boring, then people aren't going to do that. So you want to make sure that this is actually fun and engaging, and it's not really that fun or engaging. So I feel like it loses a lot of its charm pretty quickly, and I found myself getting actually bored after 5 drafts and playing about another 10 to 15. And I was just doing that because I wanted to like play a draft. And the best thing about this is that it costs 900 gems to like invest into the draft, and then you pretty much break even at 2 wins. But I found myself breaking even at 3 wins, or, you know, getting some trophies and stuff, and then just kind of being like, all right, yeah, I guess I'll do another one. But it wasn't like, all right, let's try it again. Like with Final Fantasy, like I felt like I wanted to do different things all the time, and there was a lot of fixing and other stuff going on in the set where I felt like I could just do where the draft was taking me. And this draft takes you to the same place, I would say over 50% of the time. And, you know, it's like you notice everybody's picking green, so you're just automatically into Dimir. And then like, uh-oh, somebody else pivoted into Dimir. So depending on how you sit already, like, okay, well, looks like white cards are kind of open a little bit, so now I'll go Esper. And then, yeah, it's just like there's kind of 1 or maybe to 3 different directions you can go, but, you know, it feels a lot of like the same, even when you're in the different archetypes here. Like modified plays very similar to NWeb, and they have in web cards and modified that you end up kind of using as well. It just doesn't feel different. It feels very boring. And yeah, it just kind of like is a little bit of a bummer. So this draft has not felt good for me, and I know for a fact it's not feeling good for a lot of people. You may enjoy it, and that's totally fine. I would love to hear why you enjoy it and why it's great. I don't think many draft content creators are super stoked about this set, mainly because they're going to have to play it a bunch, and then B, I don't think people are going to want to watch it. So yeah, it feels like a miss on top of like the set being kind of a miss as well. Obviously, like the set has been selling decently well. It's not a complete flop. And then some people are definitely opening, you know, some of the more expensive stuff. Still losing a lot of money though if you don't like open the big Soulstone hits or the big like 2-mana Spiderman hits. So that does feel pretty bad. But when you do open those, it feels pretty good. You know, if you hit one of like the 10 chase cards, chase styles, I would say. But yeah, so we're still waiting for prices to drop on Soulstones, so I'm not going to pull the trigger on buying any, probably for another week, 2 weeks, maybe a month, and we'll see. But yeah, VV Watch is almost over here, so we're only going to have 1 more month playing around VV, hopefully. Obviously, the market is kind of responding to that as well. Like VV has dropped to about 25 to 30 bucks. Same thing with Cauldron. Everybody who bought the deck for RCQ is now selling their deck because either they don't want to enter into more or they're done. You know, they've already like locked in their seat, locked in their placements, and they're like, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to play until this time here, and VV will probably be banned. So they're just like offloading their decks so they can start building new decks as soon as possible, because that's kind of what you have to do, which is, you know, why it's not a terrible thing that they could have just banned it earlier. But anyways, So that's going to be kind of what I want to talk about today. Just kind of a recap on how Spider-Man is like doing and feeling, and you know where the set's kind of landed. I also want to talk about draft a bit. But yeah, let's talk about our top 3 decks now.
All 3 of these this week are going to be from me. Since I've been doing a lot of brewing over the week, and you might see some other people kind of do some stuff like this as well, but yeah, these are just going to be some signposts of where to go. Yeah, not too much going on in the way of MTGO doing anything somewhat unique right now, so we're not going to see that for a while. But yeah, here's my top 3, which I think are actually pretty good. Let's start out with one that I've been actually doing super well with, and that is mono black with terminus. And I'm playing this brew here with 3 arc enemy charms. We're doing the unstoppable slasher and Aclazotz combo, but we're also putting in a spicy egrix, which can just kind of allow you to play your deck out at kind of a different pace here, just in case the game slows down. But really the cool thing about this deck is that we can play Louise and Terminus of Return. I cut the Deep Cavern Bats because I'm not a super big fan of that card. You can definitely run that card if you want. But yeah, if you're going to play Terminus to get out like Elegy or Aclazotz on 3, I think it's really important that you have more than like 1 or 2 of these. And I kind of stand by that with a lot of decks. It's probably correct to just run 2, just for the sake of me hitting it. I have 3 in here, but I'm definitely down to cut this down to 2, maybe add another Demon Wall, maybe add another like Slasher or Aclazotz, something like that. But yeah, pretty straightforward mono black deck. And then sideboard wise, we have like Carsey Revenant, House Grows Hungry. I kind of like this card as well. It's a pretty interesting card because it does a few more things, as also Graveyard Hate, which can kind of come up every now and then, as well as, you know, having Ghost Vacuum. And then for like the slower matchups, we can put in more Duress. We also have Strategic Betrayal, the end, also Outrageous Robbery, which allows us to kind of do some silly things against like more mid-rangey control decks. I also really like Liliana the Dreadhorde, so that's kind of where I'm at with it, and I think it's a pretty good deck. All right, so next one up is Sultai Ouroboros. So we got Druneth in this build. I built this last season as well, and we have Preacher of the Schism, a bunch of other like removal spells as well. But yeah, so the kind of draw to like playing this over other things is we have a bunch of removal spells. We also can sideboard in Kaido. But yeah, we can also copy the Preacher of the Schism, copy Lord Skitter, and then we get a different, you know, a second copy of these, which is really cool. So yeah, it's kind of a very straightforward brew, but I think it's pretty sweet. And yeah, definitely have had a pretty good win rate with it so far. So I think this is another one to kind of check out and look out for. Definitely could come up over time. Haven't really been seeing anybody kind of play that build yet, so want to kind of put that out there into the ether. All right, and the third and final one is going to be my Grixis Monument build. And this one actually is really good. It is playing some Mayhem stuff with Gobin and Fleem. But for the most part, it's just playing like Quint's Insight with Monument here. We have Emmett Selk, we have Steam Core Scholar, and Quantum Riddler. And this deck, like, really good at triggering a lot of value on Prof's eidetic memory and constantly discarding cards for Monument. So I really, really like this whole deck here. Gobin comes out, you know, and you can like connive and trigger Monument. It doesn't trigger the Profs, but you can put more power on it with Profs, and then you can eventually flip the Gobin and then start triggering the Fleem ability with Quint's Insight, and then play like, you know, a 2-mana Emmett Selk. You can play 1-mana Steam Core Scholar. You can play a 3-mana Riddler. Then on the sideboard, we have a bunch of like interaction stuff. We got Fire Magics. We got Disdainful Stroke. More like hand hate and stuff for like intimidation tactics. Then we also have a spicy Kefka over here that we can sideboard in for, you know, we can also sub him out for Emmett Selk. We can try other like things like, say, if you don't need like knife trick for stuff like against more mid-rangey cards, we don't really need that. So knife trick's been pretty good so far. This can also be torch to tower still, but yeah, I'm kind of liking knife trick in these types of builds. This deck kind of started out as a more mayhem-y kind of build with all the mayhem cards, but you know what? It turns out that the kind of only 2 good cards from all of that pile is Quint Insight and Gobin, and you can even go lower on Gobin itself. You can go down to maybe 2 or 3 copies of this and probably be fine. But yeah, so this deck's really cool. I'm probably going to do a video about it pretty soon here. I've seen some other Monument Brews come up, but this one only has like all the good stuff. So yeah, like if you were to cut a couple Gobins and go down like 2, you can probably add another Riddler, probably add maybe a Kefka main or something like that, or add in like 2 Torch to Towers for 2 Gobin. Definitely the strongest point of this deck is the fact that it can trigger profs and monuments so consistently, and I've been able to like beat out control decks with it. You know, just like the really cool part of this build is you can just like play for late game, play out a fleem, and then like play out fear of missing out, and you can like, you know, discard something, trigger the monument. It's like there's a lot of different like directions with this. It's almost like a VV build.
But yeah, so that's going to do it for this week. Appreciate anybody sticking around, listening to this rant about this set. Yeah, my general feelings are, you know, the draft is pretty weak, and, you know, the mechanics in general are not really playing as well as kind of everybody previously thought they would. And, you know, aesthetics aside of the set, you know, we don't care about aesthetics at the end of the day. It's more about functionality, and the synergy and functionality of everything is feeling very contained, very parasitic. So what we're going to keep looking out for is like how well each card kind of plays in the broader sense of like, can I just pepper these in? And it amplifies decks that are already existing. And that's what we want to focus on. And that's what we'll keep pushing for in terms of like new decks. All right. So appreciate everybody coming through. Please like, comment, or subscribe, and appreciate you. I'll see you soon.